So, if you're here, welcome. And if you tune in later, welcome then. My name is Louise Wisechild, and I wanted to do this little talk story this evening or this afternoon for some of you to talk about my new projects, my new digital album, The Spirit of the People, Songs of Social Conscience, and also the republication of my book, The Obsidian Mirror, both in its fifth edition and in Spanish. So for me, it's been a really wonderful time of finishing some projects that I've been working on for quite a while. And I wanted to take some time to talk about how these projects of singing and having an album of protest songs, essentially, how that meshes or combines with my experience as an author of several memoirs on healing from childhood abuse. So I'm going to tell you that when I was a kid, I have this vivid memory of standing by the road in front of my grandparents' house where we lived. And I had this little badminton racket, and I would pretend to play the badminton racket as the cars went by on the road, pretending to be a famous folk singer. And because one day at my grandparents' house, and this only happened once, but a man came, a friend of theirs, and he played the guitar and sang. And I was enchanted. I thought, that is what I want to do. And as a kid, as a child, it's so interesting when I think of being a child or seeing children, how much they play. We play with our voices. We go really, really high and we scream really loud. And then we whisper and we play with our lips and our tongues and all those kind of things. But in my family, where I grew up, children really were to be seen and not heard. And not to be seen too closely, actually. But the point of be seen and not heard was be quiet. And if there's one thing I heard as much, and maybe a little more than be quiet, it was this. Now, even as I'm recording this, I'm in Guatemala. There's apparently a really big, loud concert tonight that I didn't know was going to happen. So if you hear something in the background, it is this concert. When I was reading my horoscope today, you know what it said? Learn from any relevant chaos. And so here we are in some relevant chaos. I hope you can still hear me, and that the marimba music in the background is not a problem. So anyway, I was telling you about my family and how I didn't continue to keep playing my badminton guitar out in front of the sidewalk because we were supposed to be quiet, and there was a lot of shh, 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 shh. Now there was especially a lot of be quiet and don't tell in my house because I was being sexually abused by my grandfather. And he would say, don't tell anyone. This is a secret. This is just between you and me, Wheezy. Just between us, don't. And in my family in general, the repeated thing was, don't tell anyone what goes on outside of this house. Our family is our own private business, indeed. They didn't want anyone to know what was going on inside of our house. And then one day, I think I was maybe 6 or 7, and my uncle came to visit, and he lived all the way in New York, so it was a big deal that he was there. And he was a very tall man. He seemed very tall. So he was, kind of talking to me, trying to get me to talk. And my mother and his wife were there, and my grandfather was there. And my uncle said, sing us a song, Louise. And I started kind of hopping up and down like a little kid would. And I sang, Grandpa's candy tastes icky. Grandpa's candy tastes icky. Ick, ick, Grandpa. And as I went into my performance, not very long, it didn't go on very long, because my mother and my aunt just started talking like I wasn't singing at all. And from the sky, it seemed like my grandfather's hand came down on top of my head, and he said, "That's enough, Wheezy." And so, from this experience and a couple other experiences like this, I learned two things. One, writing is safer as long as you hide it, because it's quiet. You can write anything that you feel, anything in your mind, and you can write it down, and no one will yell at you as long as they don't see it, right? And the other thing that I learned, and that has kept me singing to this day, is that singing connects with my feelings more than anything, because there's something about that vibration of the music and how it connects with my own emotions. So that even if I'm singing the saddest song, maybe the saddest song I ever wrote, to think I wrote when I was about 13 years old, was about being a misfit. Even singing that song, which is all about how nobody cares, to sing that, I felt better. Because it's almost like I could take this experience that was inside of myself, and in singing, it could come out. It could come out. Not publicly, mind you. I participated in a hootenanny when I was in high school, and it was terrifying. Absolutely, my knees, my body was not in control. When I was at the university, I would only sing in the stairwell. When I was on a train, I would only sing in the observatory car, where no one actually could see me too much, but just enough so that people could say, "Oh, I like that." But see, this was the other problem that I had, was that I didn't believe anyone. "Oh, you like my singing, Ma. Oh, you like my writing, Ma." No, no, no. And actually it was that that inability, I think, to take in validation, because the experience of criticism had been so constant and so difficult for me as a child. Now, the other thing I want to tell you about my childhood is that, as I said, we lived with my grandparents. My mother was divorced when I was 2 years old, and at that time, which was a long time ago, I was, for example, the only student in my class who didn't have a father, a live-in father. So, and a couple years later, every other person. But so I was a little ahead of my time in that way. But what I want to say about my family is that they were political. There was a definite culture in my family that mixed both religion and politics long before MAGA became a thing. And they were staunch Republicans. They were very, very hierarchical. And so at the dinner table, for example, my grandfather could talk, and we were kind of had to wait for his permission. And no one would ever think of asking a child, what do you want? How do you feel about that? So that was not a part of the ethos, which was my grandparents were both from the Midwest, and they had actually ran away from their own families eloped to the West Coast. And yet they had this very strict code of silence and conduct, and a belief that appearance was the most important thing. And the very worst thing in the whole world was communism. So that the 50s and McCarthyism where essentially a drunk, power-mad Republican senator started accusing everyone of communism ruined people's lives. People killed themselves because of this, lost their employment. All the movies which were a little bit more radical before McCarthyism, really started to self-censor. And eventually he was debunked as being, a liar and a delusional alcoholic. And it's interesting how that threat of communism, how powerful it was in my own family, when my mother would get mad at me as I became outspoken, young hippie, and started arguing about the war and about religion and things like this. Her big yell would be, "You're a communist!" And of course, no one really knew what a communist was. It was a few years before I read Marx and read other political philosophies. But it was a lesson, I think, for today about how sticky is false news, is fake news, are accusations, and how just repeating them over time causes people to use them against other groups of people. So as I was saying, my family, very anti-communist, very religious, conservative. And we had as well a lot of racism too. Our neighbors across the street were Japanese. Mr. Nakao taught me how to ride my bicycle without training wheels, and yet my grandfather was always referred to him negatively by his ethnic group. Next door to us, my grandmother's best friend was Catholic, and this was also terrible. And the most important thing, besides being anti-communist, was everyone went to church every Sunday, and that made them respectable. So that was the kind of political culture that I grew up with. And I'd have to say that now, given Trump and the MAGA movement and white nationalists, Christian nationalists, all that, I see that the beliefs of my grandfather were, pre-Trump. He would be, delighted today to be a part of this hierarchical, very patriarchal movement. And I personally think that it's not a coincidence that this movement also is obviously at the top populated by a lot of sexual offenders. And of course, the first thing that I really wrote about, and the first place where I made some trouble personally, was with the publication of my first memoir, The Obsidian Mirror, An Adult Healing from Childhood Sexual Abuse. And this came out in 1988, after a while I was in therapy. I actually wrote it, a lot of it pretty contemporary to what was happening in my life then, when I was about 30 years old, 29, 30 years old. And I wrote down the experience of remembering and working with my childhood in these memoirs. I never intended to write a memoir. I was always going to be a writer. I wrote, before I wrote my book, I had written a lot of pages, a lot of poems, a lot of short stories, a lot of writing. And when I began therapy and I realized that this is what I was working with, of course, I looked for other writing about incest and sexual abuse. And what I found was that it was believed to be very rare and that you would never heal from it. And there was really hardly anything written about it. And I realized that I needed to write my own experience, and maybe someone else had that experience too. I think one of the things about abuse, all kinds of abuse, really is that you feel like you're the only one. It's not happening to anyone else. And I think the thing, even when I was writing the book and when people would want to know, what's that book you're writing about? And I would sort of mumble, it's about incest, it's about childhood sexual abuse. Even then, people were telling me their stories. They were telling me the stories of their sisters and their cousins. And sometimes they were telling me the story of having abused someone themselves. This is while I was writing the book. After the book came out in 1988, 36 years ago, was when I first realized that I was far from the only girl who had this experience. Then in fact, it had estimated that 1 out of every 3 girls, 1 out of every 6 boys had experienced sexual abuse when they were children. And so this was a big issue in terms of childhood safety and in terms of being able to grow up and love yourself and not think that you're bad like I did for a period of my life. So I think one of the things that really saved me culturally was that even while, being accused of being a communist and a hippie, was that it was also the anti-war movement. I attended my first protest when I was 14 years old, and I snuck out of the house and went down to the state capitol and sat in with the Quakers, who were doing a nonviolent anti-Vietnam War protest in the rotunda. And I was the only real kid there, and I didn't really know what I was doing, but I just sat down with them and felt like I was a part of something that I wanted to be part of. I would say my own conscience in terms of social justice came when I was about 7 or 8 years old, and I was in the library. Now, I'm going to tell you, the library is my favorite place in the world, was my favorite place in the world. Libraries and bookstores, I'm always in one. And I love the library because not only is it quiet there, no one can yell at you in the library. So yes, it's true, you have to be quiet, but everyone else has to be quiet too. And there's all those books. Well, I discovered a book about World War II, about the Holocaust specifically. And I saw the pictures of all these skeletal bodies in concentration camps. And I remember being appalled, really almost breathless. The people could do this to each other. The people would actually do this to each other. And yet, I suppose, being in my own family where people were doing things to each other that they were not talking about, that it wasn't really such a stretch, right? But I felt, maybe it is because of my experience as an abuse survivor, but always since I was 8, that age, I've felt really passionate about wars and about peace and about discrimination and about equal rights. And that kind of began then my experience as an activist, mostly a writing activist, writing letters, attending some protests, some meetings, which in those days could go on a long time. And yet it was all part of being a part of movements that were really standing for something greater than our own personal life, and yet also very much affecting my own personal life. So I got to a place too where I was in Guatemala, and it was right during the pandemic actually, and I've been working on several longer writing pieces for quite a while, and I had written a number of essays about economic globalization and climate change and pesticides and all of these things before, and it just kept going on, and I felt frustrated, and I felt like there's too many words, and maybe it was too much internet, too many memes, too many words. And so I thought, well, I really want to write a song. I want to write music again. I hadn't written music then when I began again in 2020 for about 15 years. And before that, it was never my primary creative expression. Songs would come to me like little gifts from heaven. Excuse me. Some water. I don't know if you can hear that, but the marimba is playing in the back. So we do have a little background music. It's just funny because one of my regrets was that I could not figure out how to post my music, as a part of this live stream, or pictures or other things. So perhaps in the future, when I'm more technologically advanced, this will happen. But for now, it's mostly stories. I had a rather ferocious cold just about over a week ago, and I'm still kind of feeling it in my chest. So I want to talk to you just a few minutes about some of the songs on my album, which I'm sorry you cannot be hearing right now. And definitely, if you have bought my album and you had any problem downloading, please let me know, and I will fix it. And also know that I'm going to send you some liner notes and a lyric sheet, but time has moved faster than me in these last couple of weeks, so that's coming later than the music itself, hopefully. So the song this was going to start with, and which you should have heard when you signed in, Bienvenidos. Welcome, says the man with a quite big sound system somewhere up the hill from me right now. So the first song we were going to hear was Make Peace Be Real, which is a song that I wrote with Matt Vincent Brown, who also produced it. And essentially, it's about making peace happen. We kind of say it's Christmas now. We're all saying, peace on earth, peace on earth. Well, let's get to work on it. If we spend even, 5% of the money we spend in the United States on bombing other people, on figuring out how to get along with each other, how to share the planet, and how to deal with conflict in some way other than hitting. I feel like, we just can't get past that. If I don't like you, bah. It's like we're at a very immature way of responding to crisis and conflict. And also, I think we perhaps haven't grogged the fact that we share this planet. No one owns it yet. Although the billionaires are actually on their way to owning it. And hopefully you've heard my song Trickle Up, and which is really about billionaires getting more and more money. And here's all these people with nothing, and yet they just keep raking it in. It's like, what is money for, actually? It certainly cannot be just to buy another yacht. So Trickle Up is about that, and we did 2 different versions. I have 4 different co-writers. It's a song that was actually a couple years in the making. And the last version, the remix, I was talking with Andy. I said, I think it needs to be a little stronger. Our first version was almost entirely acoustic. I was like, I want to hear some electric things in there, because this is an issue, the inequality of wealth, that I think is really significant, and especially now since the government, for the first time, is openly stocked with billionaires and sexual offenders. It's like, it is my time to be speaking out, and all of our time to speak out. Yeah. Also, a song that's very near and dear to my heart. It's also a recent release of mine. Is "I'm Not the Enemy," co-written with Paul Hode, who also produced it. And I think, because of what's been going on in Ukraine and in Gaza, and what actually is going on around the world every day, are wars. And the thing about war, and I've really puzzled my whole life about this thing about war, which is that people in countries, they're just living their lives. They're not arming themselves. They're just in the middle of two countries that are at war. And the other country come in and destroy everything you have. Everything a person has. And you can be completely innocent. And then you're a refugee. Instead of being a person with this identity, with a job, with a life, with a house, you're suddenly a refugee. You don't even really have a name. You don't have a country. You don't have a place to be. And that governments have taken this right upon themselves to disrupt our private property in this devastating way. I mean, it's amazing. We should not stand for this as the human race. And the other thing is, when we see it now all the time, the refugees from all these wars living in tents, surviving, keeping going, trying to immigrate, taking boat rides, walking day and night, surviving, this desire to create again, to live again, to not give up hope, to keep going, to create a life. To me, this quality that we see in refugees, that we see in migrants and immigrants, is something actually that should give us hope. It should inspire us about what is possible, how it is possible to keep going, even when you lose everything. This desire of human beings to live, to begin again, to hope again. To me, this is our potential. This is what I want to see, right? And I also want to see us welcome people that have this desire wherever we are. That we learn from them the power of not giving up even when it's hard. This desire, whether it's to create books or music or a life, our ability to create is, to me, what gives us the possibility of making good trouble. Should have started with making good trouble. In The Best of All Worlds, I would start with the theme of my presentation, which is about making good trouble, which is a quote, a phrase from John Lewis, who was a congressman and an amazing civil rights leader. He was almost killed a couple times standing up non-violently himself for civil rights, and was an amazing speaker. So when we're talking about making peace being real, and about not weaponizing other people who are trying to survive, who are showing us, the strength, the promise of the human spirit. I think, the other thing too, about war and about being an activist over time is I remember I was a small group leader at a Fellowship of Reconciliation summer camp. And the thing about the Fellowship of Reconciliation is that it's made up of people who have been standing, protesting, writing for, working for peace their entire lives. And so when I led this small group, I was probably in my 40s, and people there were in their 70s and 80s. And what became really clear to them was they accepted the fact that creating peace, that stopping war, that this was a long-term project, that this was something that was taking time. And this song, No More Wars, Peace and Justice, that I wrote, is actually about a connection I had with a long-time peace activist, Ginny McCarthy. And we knew each other many years, and when I moved away, she was still in Seattle, and I would go and stay with her, and we would talk into the night, late into the night, all day long about everything in the world that was happening. And actually, we also attended several protests together, which was the most remarkable one was the WTO protest in Seattle in 1999, and also known as the Battle of Seattle. And my friend Ginny, she was an observer for the National Lawyers Guild. And I was just a protester, linking arms with the dolphins and sea turtles and all the ways the clowns, people were dressed up to protest NAFTA, actually. And at one point, it had been going pretty nonviolently and very peacefully. There was a dumpster set on fire, which is kind of traditional for a protest. Anyway, at 5 o'clock that day, suddenly there were rubber bullets and there was pepper spray, and the police were there on horses and you couldn't see anything, and they had gas masks on, and actually they were marching down the street in this thing I'd never seen, and there were tanks in the streets of Seattle. I mean, this was unbelievable. As a person who had, like myself, been in anti-war protests years before, and the cops were, in cotton shirts and not gas masks, and they looked like Darth Vader there. You didn't know who they were. And and so they're marching down the street, and Ginny, as an observer, she's trying to take a picture of them in the middle of the street. And at that time, she was like 76 years old, right? She's taking a picture of these cops coming down the street, and one of them just takes their baton and knocks her into the gutter, essentially. And I can't even find a way to identify as this person a man or woman. Who are these people under this? They look like Darth Vader, seriously, hitting their batons on their boots. It was like a movie. And the pepper spray and the sound cannons, I was like, oh man, I really don't like this. This is like being in a war. And so I said to Ginny, I helped her up. Are you okay? Yes, I'm fine. And then there was a curfew because of all this pepper spray and gas masks and all these things that were happening. And I was really ready to go home at that point. I mean, we just could barely see through the pepper spray and all this. And Ginny was like, no, I have to stay and take down the reports of the people who are hit by the rubber bullets here. So even though it was the curfew, and I was like, well, I'm not leaving without you. And so that was my indomitable friend, Ginny McCarthy. And we get together at some of these long talks about the world and politics and life. And we would have the most wonderful, meaningful conversations. We would go out and eat Ethiopian food, and it was just always such a meeting, such a communion with another person who also felt so passionately about peace and diversity and inclusion and human rights. So when I wrote this song, No More Wars, Peace and Justice, I was thinking about Ginny. And if you know the song, it's like, it's been, I can't tell you right now. But it has all these adjectives about the wonderfulness of being with Ginny as we reminisce about our early days protesting when you could see the faces of the cops. And now. And before, when we protested before, if you saw people with cameras, they were probably either with the underground newspaper or the CIA or the FBI. And now, of course, everyone has a camera. Who knows who was a spy? Possibly everyone. So that's how No More Wars, Peace and Justice came out. Of course, I want to talk about every song, and there are 12 songs, so I'm not going to do that. But I do want to talk about a few more songs. One is, I think, having been in high school, as I was, when abortion was illegal, and getting pregnant was actually considered to be the end of your life if you wanted to go to college. If you wanted to do anything but get married and have a baby, you better not be pregnant, and it's all on you, on the girl. And fortunately for me, given what was going on in my family, I did not get pregnant. And I knew friends, who had gone to Mexico for an abortion and bled on the bus all the way back. And it was I remember it was just a huge feeling of relief and freedom and control over my own sex life when Roe v. Wade passed, right? It totally changed every woman's life, truly. That there was now an option. And also that women were going to be able to be in charge of carrying a baby, a fetus in their body for 9 months, and then caring for it for 30 years. Let's be real. And to be still alive in the same lifetime when this profound right of women's sovereignty and autonomy was overturned by the Supreme Court was shocking in a bad way because of the implications of it and because what has happened. And I think the thing that always gets me is this idea that the fetus and then the baby itself, separate from its mother, is an entity that will not be provided with guaranteed food or childcare or education in a safe place, that lacking any legislated support for children, that this baby, that the relationship with the parent, with the mother, did not matter at all. So if the mother is pregnant and is being forced to be pregnant and is the whole time saying, I really don't want this baby, I really don't want this baby, and the baby's in there going, So, and then this assumption that this unwanted baby being born maybe in an unfriendly family, in an unsupportive country, is so happy to be born, to me is questionable. So I decided to write a song from the point of view of the unborn, since there are some among us who are so keen on giving rights to the unborn. Well, were they really giving any right to the unborn? No, they're taking away the right from the mother. And so I wrote this song about, I don't want to be your baby if you don't want me. Because, I know what it's going to take for me to thrive. And then in that song, I tried to include every reason why a woman at a particular point in her life, or maybe ever in her life, would not want to have a baby. Whether it's too many jobs, whether it's realizing that the father of the child, the sperm donor, is not on board and is actually getting more violent with the news that she might be pregnant. I mean, this is a classic thing. A lot of domestic abuse happens during pregnancy. It's a very dangerous time for women. And then pregnancy itself is also very dangerous. And that this unborn baby said, I want you to wait until you're ready to have a child. I want you to have what you need. I want my mama to be free when she has me. So that's like the message of that song. I hope you'll give it a listen. A little marimba-ish. I might mention that that I am recording this from my house in Guatemala, right near Lake Atitlan, and as it is the 15th of December, we're really going into Navidad, into Nuevo Año, into a celebration of Christmas, of holidays, and definitely of New Year. It's real different here. If you ever think about visiting for a festival, there's lots of lights and music and things around Christmas here, but on Christmas Day, everyone's only with their family. It's not like New Year's, when everyone will bring you a tamale and invite you to their house, and there's ponche and all that. Christmas here is very celebrated on Christmas Eve, and it's like just with the family. So that's very different than when, for example, I was in Mexico, and people would invite me for Christmas. Mexicans. It's not that kind of event here in Guatemala. But I will tell you that here in Guatemala in December, this morning, the sky blue, so blue. It's the season of the wind, so there's a lot of wind. It's very fresh, but it's not cold, and everything is still very, very green and gorgeous from the rainy season, which ended about a couple weeks ago. So it's a beautiful time. Really, December, January, February, March, really beautiful times to visit Guatemala and also see some of the culture here. Some of you know that I live in a pueblo that is over 90% indigenous Mayan people who are very strong community in themselves, and about 50% Catholic and 50% evangelical here in San Pedro, on the shores of what's been called the most beautiful lake in the world, Lago Atitlan. And I've been here about 14 years, and every time when I go down to the lake, which is very close to my house, I am awestruck by how beautiful it is being in this cauldron and how fortunate I am to be here. So, speaking of things that have been going on and the connection with my family and my childhood experiences, when QAnon arose, I was like, oh yeah, I know. I know people who would believe this, who would go down all these rabbit holes, and who would simultaneously deny sexual abuse in their own house while being totally fixated on sex traffickers among major Democrats, or sex trafficking rings in pizza parlors, or children being hidden in the cabinets of Wayfair department store. Things like that, that of course were not proven to be true, and which really did complicate the efforts of people that really were involved in what is a thriving and terrible problem, which is the sexual abuse of children and the sex trafficking of children. And now, at this time, with our laws, our abortion laws in some states, don't even have exceptions for rape or incest. And the idea that a girl could be impregnated, or that anyone could be impregnated and raped, and not have absolute choice about whether to keep that fetus or not, is, to me, seems like it should be illegal, right? I mean, incest is a crime, and so is rape. So, why is it that that those people, those very victims, are also being deprived rights in many states today? So, again, song from the Unwanted. So I was talking about QAnon, though, because I was talking about sex trafficking, and Andy and Evans and I then decided to write a song about QAnon, and we truly thought it would have a very short life. That it was, just one of those cults that would rise during the pandemic and kind of fade out in the vast muttering halls of the dark web. But of course it didn't. It's become almost mainstream in some of its beliefs and misinformation. So we wrote a song about having a friend that got involved in the rabbit hole of QAnon and started looking everywhere but in the real source for pedophiles, and the news that had once been considered the mainstream news was all fake, and kind of like with McCarthyism, the trail of false information, then it doesn't go away. It just gets liked and spread around, and now it's in office, or going to be in office shortly. So I hope you listen to that. It's called Come Back Alice, and it's about our friend Alice that got involved, that went down the rabbit hole, and how much we wish that she would stop going there. So it's called Come Back Alice. The last song that I want to talk about, and I was hoping, oh look, I remember those days. It was called Getting Caught. I mean, I have a comment, the only one in my chat, so might be the only person here. Hi, Marianne. I'm glad you're here. So, so the last song I want to talk about is Buzzing Bees. And this actually was a song I wrote some years ago, and then Andy and I did some work on it much more recently. But I had gone to a workshop with Vandana Shiva and Satish Kumar at the Whidbey Center in Washington State. And the workshop was a 10-day workshop on spirituality and nonviolence. And what I took from that workshop was this amazing exercise that they had us do, and which really helped me understand diversity and solidarity in a different way. And they said, okay, now imagine that for every identity you have a hat. And so you have all these different hats. And so, for example, my hat would be, I'm a feminist, I'm a woman, I'm a lesbian, I'm an activist, I'm a nature worshiper, I'm a writer, I'm a singer-songwriter, all those things. And those are all some of my identities, right? And all of you, I know, also have a lot of hats that you're wearing when you think of it. It's like what you do, what your gender is, what your sexual preference is, what your affinity groups with, who you like to hang out with. Those are all our individual identities. And yet there are bigger hats. There are hats that each and every one of us wear, right? That's the thing. And so the first hat that we all wear as two-leggeds, as my friend Vicky used to say, two-leggeds, we are all human beings. And so we have this in common, no matter these identities. we're all human beings. And one of the sad things maybe is that evolutionarily, some of us are still unable to realize that we're all human beings, that this is a hat. We share, and we have the same needs. Human beings. You know, we need shelter, we need food, we need air, we need water, and also we need love. So this is our human hat. And it's kind of like if we could see other people as humans instead of like, oh, is that person trans? Is that person MAGA? Is that person this or that? If we could go, human, yes, human. Beyond humans, we are mammals. We're mammals. And so then we get into four-legged creatures, right? And so it's even bigger hat than humans is the mammal hat. And even bigger than the mammal hat is the earthling hat. Everyone, every being on this planet is an earthling with us. Okay, right now we have a very big, very inclusive hat that includes you and me and the cats and the dogs and the fleas and the ants, you know. And then we're also have even a bigger hat. And this is our cosmos hat. We're a part of the universe. I mean, so we have these huge hats. And of course, when we have hats that big, we start to realize that we're really kind of small, actually. It's like when we see those pictures from outer space looking at Earth. It's like, oh yeah, I'm a little kind of dot somewhere down there. Which doesn't mean that we're insignificant. It just means that we're part of a much bigger thing. And so that visualization, that inspiration, that meditation led me to write the song Buzzing Bees. If she is he and he is she, if you are me and we are them, if we could see we're also trees and ants and plants and buzzing bees. We are space and time and art. Each one plays a different part. The cats, the fleas, we're all a mirror saying, look, who's living here? If she is he and he is she, if you are me, if we are them and you are me, we are plants and ants and trees and even buzzing bees. So it really is a song about that, is how to recognize our place, who we are, our potential, by realizing that we all are connected, that we are a part of something larger. So, I hope you will check out my album and also check out my books, which are also now in Spanish. And I want to tell you a quote from John Lewis. When you see something that is not right, not fair, not just, you have to speak up. You have to say something. You have to do something. You have to make good trouble, necessary trouble. Now, as we look at the year ahead, it looks like it could be rough. Not exactly a human rights friendly year. So I guess my takeaway for all of you would be that what I have learned is that creativity, our power to use our creativity, can help us face really difficult situations and use our voice and turn it into something else, to make something out of what's happening, to make something that is life-affirming, that is inclusive, and that brings peace. So anyway, thank you so very much for coming today. And I hopefully next time when I master this technology, I'll have different parts of songs and a different background music. Anyway, I wish you all a very happy Christmas, a Christmas where you can know some peace and feel the love and be bringing the light into 2025 together, knowing that we are not alone, that we are standing with each other. Thanks for joining me. Bye.